Dr. Veltar clicked his claws against the metal desk as he read through another boring first contact report. His office on Council Station Omega-7 was filled with thousands of similar files. New species contacted the Galactic Council every few days, months, and most were exactly the same. Small, weak creatures from safe worlds who wanted to trade and make friends. This new report was about a species called humans, from a planet they called Earth. Veltar yawned and almost put the file in the standard processing pile. But something made him pause. The planet classification caught his eye. Death World, Category 9. That was unusual. Most intelligent species came from nice, safe planets with gentle weather and friendly animals. He read more carefully. Earth had extreme gravity that would crush most Council species. The atmosphere contained poison gases that would kill visitors in minutes. The weather included massive storms that could destroy cities, wild animals that could tear apart armored vehicles. And the humans lived there happily, calling it home. Veltar shook his head. The report had to be wrong. No species could evolve intelligence on a world that dangerous. He marked the file for standard first contact procedures and forgot about it. 3 days later, a human ship arrived at the station. Veltar watched from his office window as the vessel docked. It looked strange, built heavy and thick like it expected to be shot at. Most peaceful species built their ships light and pretty. This one looked like a weapon that could also carry people. The human delegation walked into the station through the main airlock. Veltar had seen thousands of first contacts, and new species always acted the same way. They were scared, nervous, trying to look small and harmless. They jumped at loud noises and stared in fear at the bigger Council species. The humans did none of that. Ambassador Hyunwoo Park walked into the station like he owned it. He was tall for his species, with dark hair and calm eyes that seemed to see everything. Behind him came Dr. Soojin Kim, a woman with quick hands and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Colonel Tae-min Lee followed them, moving like a predator that was trying very hard to look peaceful. When they met the Council Reception Committee, Park stepped forward and offered his hand to each delegate. Even to Krixtal, the 8-foot-tall reptilian security chief whose claws could cut through steel. Even to the floating gas entity Norvek, whose appearance had made 3 species faint during their first contacts. Park just smiled and said, "Hello, we're honored to meet you." Veltar watched from the observation deck as the humans were given their tour. Most new species stayed close together, looking around nervously at the strange architecture and alien technology. The humans spread out. They asked questions about everything. How did the gravity generators work? What were the power requirements for life support? How many people lived on the station? Dr. Kim stopped at every computer terminal they passed, studying the interfaces with the focused attention of someone, memorizing everything she saw. Colonel Lee examined the walls and ceiling, his eyes tracking what Veltar suddenly realized were defensive positions and escape routes. During the formal meeting, High Chancellor Mordrix welcomed the humans to galactic civilization. He was a peaceful creature, tall and thin with soft fur and large, gentle eyes. Most species found him comforting. The humans studied him like they were deciding whether he would make a good meal. "We come in peace," Ambassador Park said in perfect, galactic standard. His accent was strange, but his grammar was flawless. "Humanity wishes to join the community of civilized worlds and contribute to galactic prosperity." Standard words. Every species said something similar, but when Park said them, they sounded different, like a promise, or maybe a threat. Chancellor Mordrix asked about human society. Park described a world with billions of humans living in massive cities, working together in perfect cooperation. He mentioned their governments, their arts, their sciences, all normal things that civilized species talked about. But then Dr. Kim added helpfully, "We've had some practice working together. We've fought wars against each other for thousands of years, so we learned how to organize large groups very efficiently." The council delegates shifted uncomfortably. Wars were rare among civilized species. Most conflicts were settled through discussion and trade agreements. Dr. Kim spoke about warfare like other species might discuss farming techniques. Colonel Lee was asked about human military capabilities. He smiled politely and said, "We maintain defensive forces for protection against natural disasters and dangerous wildlife. Nothing that would threaten peaceful neighbors." When pressed for details, he mentioned that human police forces routinely dealt with creatures that would be classified as apex predators on most council worlds. Human emergency responders worked in environments that would kill most species instantly. Human recreational activities included things like jumping out of flying vehicles for fun and swimming in water filled with creatures that ate other creatures. Veltar felt his fur stand up as he listened. These humans were talking about their world like it was normal. But every normal thing they described would be a nightmare scenario for any civilized species. After the meeting, the humans were given quarters in the diplomatic section. They thanked their guides politely and settled in without complaint. Veltar checked the environmental settings for their rooms and nearly fell off his chair. The humans had requested atmospheric pressure that would crush most species. Temperature, levels that would cook alive anyone except the hardiest desert dwellers, and they complained that it was a bit cold, but said they could manage. That night, Veltar couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the humans' calm behavior, their casual mentions of violence and danger, their complete lack of fear when meeting species that terrified most others. He pulled up their planet classification again and stared at the words, Death World Category 9. Most death worlds were empty, lifeless rocks where nothing could survive. The few that had life were usually avoided by all civilized species. They were places where evolution had gone wrong, creating monsters and disasters that killed everything they touched. But humans called one of these places home. They had built a civilization there. They had billions of people living happily on a world that should have killed them all. Veltar closed the file and tried to sleep, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the Galactic Council had just made first contact with something far more dangerous than they realized. The humans seemed friendly and peaceful, but so did many predators right up until they decided to hunt. The next morning he would start the standard observation period. 6 months of watching and learning about this new species. 6 months to decide if humanity should be welcomed into galactic civilization. Veltar hoped 6 months would be enough time to figure out what the humans really were and what they really wanted, because something deep in his primitive brain was screaming that these peaceful visitors from their death world were not what they seemed to be. Security Chief Crixtal had been watching species for 40 years. He knew how every kind of creature behaved when they were scared, nervous, or trying to hide something. He had seen brave species and cowardly species, aggressive species and peaceful ones. But he had never seen anything like the humans. They had been on the station for 2 weeks now, and they acted like they belonged there. Most new species stayed close to their quarters, only coming out for official meetings. The humans wandered everywhere. They visited the markets, talked to maintenance crews, and asked questions about everything they saw. Captain Wu Sung Han from the human delegation had become particularly troubling. Yesterday, there had been an accident in Section 7. A coolant leak had filled the corridor with toxic gas that could kill most species in minutes. Emergency teams were evacuating the area when Han walked through the cloud like it was morning mist. "Excuse me," he said politely to the emergency crew. "I was looking for the engineering department. Is it this way?" The Skitari emergency chief had stared at him in shock. "Sir, this area is contaminated. You need breathing equipment." Han looked confused. "Oh, this stuff, it smells a bit sharp, but I'm fine. We have worse air in our big cities back home." He walked away, leaving the emergency crew staring after him. Later medical scans showed that the gas was still in his lungs, but his body was processing it like it was normal air. Dr. Veltar added another note to his growing file of human oddities. Dr. Hyejin Choi was causing her own problems. She had requested access to the Council's biological archives to better understand galactic diversity. The request seemed reasonable, so they gave her basic access to species information. But her research patterns were disturbing. She spent most of her time reading about extinct species, not the ones that died from disease or natural disasters. She focused on the ones that had been eliminated because they were too dangerous to exist. species that had been wiped out by the Council's military forces because they threatened galactic peace. Fascinating, she would say, reading about civilizations that had been destroyed for being too aggressive. What was their population density? How did they organize their military forces? What weapons did they prefer? The archival staff started requiring escorts when she visited. There was something unsettling about the way she asked questions, like she was taking notes for future reference. The breaking point came during a cultural exchange dinner. The Council had organized the event to help the humans meet other species in a relaxed setting. Representatives from dozens of worlds attended, bringing traditional foods and drinks from their homelands. Engineer Ji-Ho Kim from the human delegation was eager to try everything. He sampled foods that ranged from mild plant extracts to fermented protein compounds. Then someone offered him Rigelian brandy, a drink so strong that most species diluted it heavily before consuming it. Kim drank it straight and asked for more. "This is wonderful," he said, ignoring the shocked stares from other delegates. "It reminds me of something we make back home. We call it vodka." Dr. Veltar checked the chemical composition of Rigelian brandy. It was 70% ethanol, a solvent that dissolved organic tissue on contact. For most species, a single sip would cause immediate organ failure. Kim had consumed an entire glass and was asking about the manufacturing process. Things got worse when the conversation turned to food. Dr. Choi was asked about human cuisine, and she cheerfully described their cooking methods. She mentioned that humans regularly consumed the flesh of other creatures, often while it was still hot from being cooked alive. She talked about plants that produced chemical compounds designed to cause pain and tissue damage, which humans added to food for flavor. "We call them spices," she explained to the horrified delegates. "Some of our favorites are made from seeds that evolved to hurt anything that tried to eat them. The more painful, the more we enjoy them." When asked about dangerous creatures on Earth, Dr. Choi showed holographic images from her personal files. Massive aquatic predators with teeth longer than most delegates' arms. Humans swam with these creatures for entertainment. Land predators that could kill most council species with a single bite. Humans kept smaller versions as pets and companions. "This is our family dog," she said, showing a picture of herself with a creature that looked like a miniature wolf. "His name is Max. He's very gentle with children." The creature in the image had fangs and claws that could tear through armor plating. Its eyes showed the focused intelligence of a pack hunter, and Dr. Choi was hugging it like it was a harmless toy. But the most disturbing revelation came when someone asked about human recreational activities. Captain Han mentioned that humans enjoyed extreme sports where they deliberately put themselves in dangerous situations for fun. "Some people like to climb vertical rock faces using only their hands and feet," he explained. "Others jump out of aircraft and fall toward the ground before opening parachutes at the last moment. My personal favorite is deep-sea diving, where you swim down to depths that would crush most creatures and explore areas where giant predators live." The council delegates sat in stunned silence. These activities weren't recreation. They were elaborate suicide methods that somehow humans survived regularly. Engineer Kim added helpfully, "We also enjoy contact sports where teams of humans try to physically dominate each other while moving a ball around a field. Injuries are common and expected. Breaking bones is considered part of the normal game experience." Dr. Veltar excused himself early and went straight to his office. He pulled up the human files and began cross-referencing their casual descriptions with military databases. Everything the humans described as normal life matched classified reports about bioweapons and torture methods. They consumed chemical compounds that were used as industrial solvents. They lived with creatures that were classified as military-grade biological weapons. They engaged in activities that were designed to test the physical limits of living tissue. And they called it fun. Late that night, Veltar received a message from the Council's Psychological Evaluation Department. 3 delegates from the cultural dinner had required medical treatment for stress-induced trauma. They were having nightmares about humans eating them alive while discussing the weather. Veltar started typing a new report, but his claws kept shaking. The humans weren't hiding their true nature because they didn't think there was anything to hide. This was them being friendly and social. This was them trying to fit in with civilized society. If this was how they acted when they were being peaceful and diplomatic, what were they like when they were actually trying to be dangerous? He marked the file as requiring immediate council review, and tried not to think about the fact that more human ships were scheduled to arrive next week. The humans called it a small diplomatic convoy to show support for the cultural exchange. But Veltar had seen the sensor readings. Each ship was the size of a council battlecruiser and powered by reactions that could level mountains. And the humans thought this was appropriate for a friendly social visit. He sent the report and prayed to whatever gods might listen, that the council would figure out what to do about humanity, before humanity decided to do something about the council. Dr. Veltar couldn't sleep again. For 3 nights, he had been digging through the council's oldest archives, following a terrible suspicion that grew stronger with every file he opened. The humans' casual descriptions of their world and their behavior matched something he had read years ago, something that should have been impossible. The restricted archives were buried deep in the station's core, protected by security measures that few council members could bypass. But Veltar's research credentials gave him access to historical files that most people forgot existed. Files from the First Galactic War, 50,000 years ago, when civilization almost ended. The war had been brutal beyond anything in modern history. 2 massive alliances had fought across hundreds of systems, using weapons that could destroy planets and kill billions. The fighting had continued for decades, until suddenly, mysteriously, both sides agreed to a ceasefire. The official records said it was due to exhaustion and economic collapse. But there were other records, older ones written in languages that few modern scholars could read. Reports from military commanders and government officials who had lived through the wars. And they told a different story. They spoke of visitors who came from the void between stars, creatures that looked almost familiar, like distant cousins of known species, but wrong in ways that made hardened soldiers weep in terror. They called themselves by a name that translated poorly, something like those who walk among death or the speakers for ending. Veltar had dismissed these reports as mythology when he first read them during his historical studies. War stories always got exaggerated over time. Desperate people created legends to explain events they couldn't understand. But now, reading them again while thinking about humans, every detail made perfect sense. The ancient reports described bipedal creatures of average height, with manipulator appendages and forward-facing eyes. Pack hunters that showed unusual intelligence and disturbing emotional control. They came from a world where death itself feared to walk, a place of such violence and horror that it had forged beings who could survive anything. The visitors had contacted both sides in the war, offering to serve as neutral mediators. They seemed peaceful, even friendly. They asked polite questions about military capabilities and population centers. They requested tours of important facilities and weapons manufacturing sites. They appeared fascinated by the technology that was being used to kill billions of people. Then they made their offer. They would demonstrate a solution to the conflict that would satisfy everyone involved. They asked both sides to attack them with their most powerful weapons, not their ships or their technology, them personally. They would stand in the open and let both militaries use their planet-killing devices against them. The military commanders thought it was suicide, but they agreed. Here was a chance to test their weapons on volunteer targets while impressing neutral observers. Both sides brought their most devastating weapons to a small moon in neutral space. They told the visitors to surrender or die. The visitors smiled and said they understood. Then they walked to the center of the target zone and waited. Both sides opened fire at the same time. They used fusion bombs, antimatter missiles, chemical weapons, biological agents, and energy weapons that could crack continents. They turned the moon's surface into molten glass and poisoned the atmosphere with radiation that would kill any known life form. When the smoke cleared, the visitors were still standing there. They were discussing the weather and asking if anyone wanted to share lunch. The military commanders tried again. They used bigger weapons, more sophisticated poisons, energy levels that should have unmade matter at the atomic level. The visitors took notes and complimented the engineering involved. They asked technical questions about weapon design and suggested improvements that could make the devices more efficient. After 3 days of constant bombardment, the visitors called for a break. They had been keeping score, and they announced the results. Both sides had successfully demonstrated that they could destroy all life in their home systems several times over. But they had also proven that there were beings in the universe who could survive anything they could create. You have 2 choices, the visitors said calmly. You can continue fighting each other until you're all dead, or you can make peace and join the larger community of civilized worlds. Either way is fine with us. We just wanted you to know that you're not alone in the universe, and some of your neighbors are much harder to kill than you are. The ceasefire began the next day. Both sides were too terrified to continue fighting, while creatures that could walk through planet-killing weapons were watching with interest. The visitors left after the peace treaty was signed, promising to check back in a few thousand years to see how everyone was doing. Dr. Veltar finished reading the last report and sat back in his chair, his entire body trembling. The ancient name for these creatures was Tal-Nash Morden in the Old Tongue. Those who dance with ending. The mythical species that had ended the bloodiest war in galactic history by proving that death was just another environmental condition they could adapt to. And now they were back. Living in the diplomatic quarters and asking about trade agreements, he pulled up the surveillance files from the human quarters and watched the feeds with new understanding. Colonel Lee practicing combat forms that assumed his enemies would use chemical weapons, explosive devices, and energy weapons against him at the same time. Dr. Kim reviewing technical specifications for station systems like she was planning to survive their failure. Captain Han testing the emergency equipment in his room to see how long it would function in a complete life support failure. They weren't being paranoid or preparing for war. They were just doing what their species always did. They were figuring out how to survive whatever might try to kill them next. The entertainment files were even more disturbing when viewed with this knowledge. Human stories and games were filled with scenarios where their entire species faced extinction from war, disease, natural disasters, or alien invasion. And in every story, the humans found a way to survive and rebuild. They turned every possible apocalypse into a training exercise. Dr. Veltar activated the emergency communication system and sent a priority message to every council member. The subject line was simple: First contact species identification, critical. The message body was shorter. The humans are Tal-Nash Morden. Recommend immediate emergency session. We are not dealing with a new species seeking membership. We are dealing with the return of the Death Walkers. Within an hour, emergency response teams were quietly surrounding the diplomatic quarters, not to attack the humans but to monitor them more carefully. Because everyone who read the old stories knew that the last time these creatures had visited galactic civilization, their presence had ended the largest war in history. The question now was what their return meant for the current state of galactic peace. Were they here to check on the civilizations they had saved 50,000 years ago? Were they planning to settle down and become permanent neighbors? Or had they detected some new threat that required their attention? Dr. Veltar looked at the surveillance screen showing the humans sleeping peacefully in their quarters. Ambassador Park was reading what appeared to be a romance novel. Dr. Kim was working on language exercises. Colonel Lee was sharpening a knife that could probably cut through station hull plating. They looked so normal, so harmless, so friendly, just like they had 50,000 years ago, right before they proved that they could survive anything the universe could throw at them. The council emergency session was scheduled for tomorrow morning. By then, Veltar hoped someone would have figured out what to do when legends decided to introduce themselves as tourists. The emergency council session began in chaos. High Chancellor Mordrix called for order, but his normally calm voice shook as he spoke. Around the circular chamber, representatives from hundreds of worlds whispered frantically to each other. The air systems worked overtime to filter out the stress pheromones and fear chemicals being released by dozens of different species. Dr. Veltar stood at the center podium, surrounded by holographic displays showing his research. Ancient texts, historical records, and surveillance footage of the humans created a timeline that stretched back 50,000 years. The evidence was undeniable, and it terrified everyone who saw it. "The humans are not a new species," Veltar said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. "They are the return of the Talnash Mordun, the Death Walkers who ended the First Galactic War. Every behavior we have observed matches the historical records perfectly." War Chief Grakthor of the Saurian Empire slammed his massive fist against his speaking platform. His species were the closest thing the galaxy had to natural warriors, descendants of apex predators who had dominated their homeworld for millions of years. But even he looked afraid as he spoke. "If these creatures are truly the Deathwalkers of legend, then we face an existential threat," he growled. "The old stories say they could survive any weapon, adapt to any environment, and kill any enemy. We should strike first while we still can." Trade Coordinator Zilfara flickered her tentacles in the complex pattern that indicated extreme agitation. Her species managed most of the galaxy's economic networks, and she had been calculating the implications of human involvement in galactic commerce. "Strike them with what?" she asked in her musical voice. "According to the historical records, they survived direct hits from planet-killing weapons. Our current military technology is barely more advanced than what was used against them 50,000 years ago. And besides, they have already demonstrated friendly intentions. They came, here asking for trade agreements, not making demands." Defense Minister Kethavar of the Peaceful Etherian Collective stood slowly, his transparent form shimmering with distress. His people had evolved from prey animals and maintained their pacifist nature even after achieving spaceflight. The idea of living in the same galaxy as legendary predators was almost too much for his psychology to handle. "Friendly intentions?" he whispered. "They asked questions about our station layouts, our security systems, our population distributions. We thought it was curiosity. Now we know it was reconnaissance. They have been evaluating us as potential prey since the moment they arrived." Historical. Analyst Velkron activated his data display, showing tactical breakdowns of every human interaction with Council personnel. His analysis was thorough and completely terrifying. "Every conversation the humans have had with us can be interpreted as intelligence gathering," he said. "Ambassador Park's questions about governance structures were evaluating our command hierarchy. Dr. Kim's research requests were mapping our information networks. Captain Han's interest in station maintenance was identifying critical system vulnerabilities. The UI display showed movement patterns, conversation topics, and behavioral analysis that painted a picture of perfectly executed reconnaissance by expert predators. Even their casual socializing had strategic value, gathering information about species psychology and physical capabilities. But here is the most disturbing part," Velkron continued. "They are not trying to hide any of this. They answered every question honestly, shared information freely, and allowed us to observe their activities without restriction. This suggests either supreme confidence in their superiority or—" He paused, looking around the chamber at the terrified faces staring back at him. "Or this is how they behave when they are genuinely trying to be peaceful and diplomatic, which means we have no idea what they are capable of when they decide to be hostile." Chancellor Mordrix called for a brief recess to allow representatives to process the information. Small groups formed around the chamber as different species tried to understand what they were facing. The conversations were heated but quiet, as if speaking too loudly might attract the attention of the creatures sleeping in the diplomatic quarters. Council military strategist Threndal presented the most chilling analysis when the session resumed. He had run computer simulations of various response scenarios, and the results were uniformly pessimistic. "If we attempt to evacuate the station, they will know we consider them a threat," he said. "If we try to contain them, we risk provoking creatures who survived weapons that could destroy continents. If we ignore them and hope they go away, we have 3 more human ships arriving tomorrow with what they describe as additional diplomatic support." The external sensor data appeared on the main display, showing the approaching human vessels. Each ship was larger than a Council battlecruiser and showed energy signatures that suggested power systems capable of running small star systems. The humans had casually mentioned that these were transport ships with light escort capability. Their idea of light escort, Threndall continued, appears to involve enough firepower to sterilize entire planets, and they are bringing them to a diplomatic meeting because they consider this an appropriate show of peaceful intentions. Young council member Frixala of the Aquatic Confederation raised a question that everyone had been avoiding. Her species were known for their logical thinking and emotional stability, but even she sounded shaken. What if they are not here to threaten us? The historical records show that the Deathwalkers ended the First Galactic War by proving that fighting was pointless, not by conquering anyone. What if they have returned because they detected some new threat that requires their attention? The chamber fell silent as everyone considered this possibility. If the Deathwalkers had returned after 50,000 years, what could have awakened them? What kind of danger could threaten beings who could survive planet-killing weapons? Security Chief Crixtal added another disturbing observation. Long-range sensors have detected unusual activity in the outer systems, energy signatures that do not match any known technology. If the humans have returned to deal with some external threat, we may be facing something even worse than legendary predators. The debate continued for hours, but no clear consensus emerged. Some representatives argued for immediate evacuation of all council facilities. Others wanted to attempt negotiation and careful relationship building. A few suggested offering the humans anything they wanted in exchange for protection against whatever had brought them back. As the session dragged on, a message arrived from the diplomatic quarters. Ambassador Park was requesting an emergency meeting. He wanted to discuss some concerns that have come to our attention regarding the Council's perception of human intentions. The message was politely worded and completely professional. It was also the most terrifying thing anyone in the chamber had ever received. The legendary Deathwalkers knew they had been discovered, and they wanted to talk. Chancellor Mordrix looked around the chamber at hundreds of terrified representatives from across the galaxy. Species that had never agreed on anything were united in their fear of what the morning might bring. "The session is adjourned," he announced. "We will reconvene tomorrow morning to hear what the humans have to say. I suggest everyone spend tonight considering whether we are about to witness the end of galactic civilization or the beginning of something we are not prepared to understand." As the representatives filed out of the chamber, Dr. Veltar remained at his podium, staring at the surveillance feeds from the human quarters. Ambassador Park was typing on a small device, probably preparing for tomorrow's meeting. Dr. Kim was reading what appeared to be a children's book, smiling at the pictures. Colonel Lee was doing exercises that looked like they were designed to keep him combat-ready in zero gravity. They looked so normal, so peaceful, so friendly, just like 50,000 years ago, when they had ended the bloodiest war in galactic history by being too terrifying to fight against. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn what the Deathwalkers wanted this time, and everyone hoped they would survive the answer. Ambassador Park walked into the council chamber with the same calm confidence he had shown during his first visit. Behind him, Dr. Choi carried a data tablet and wore what the council now recognized as the patient expression of a predator who was trying very hard to be helpful. The assembled representatives from hundreds of worlds watched them in complete silence. High Chancellor Mordrix had spent the entire night preparing for this moment, but his carefully planned opening remarks disappeared when he saw Park's gentle smile. The human looked exactly like what he claimed to be, a friendly diplomat who wanted to have a reasonable conversation. That somehow made everything more terrifying. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," Park said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber despite its conversational tone. "We've noticed some concern among our new friends about humanity's historical reputation. We thought it might be helpful to clear up any misconceptions." He activated his data tablet, and holographic displays filled the air above the central podium. Images, documents, and recordings that stretched back through human history appeared in perfect chronological order. The council representatives leaned forward despite their fear, because this was the first time anyone had seen actual records from the Deathwalkers themselves. 50,000 years ago, representatives of humanity visited this region of space. During what you call the First Galactic War, Park continued, they were part of our exploration service, sent to investigate reports of large-scale conflict that was interfering with natural development patterns in several star systems. Dr. Choi added helpfully, our ancestors were concerned that the war might spread to uninhabited systems and interfere with the evolution of primitive life forms. We have always been very protective of developing ecosystems. The holographic display showed images of ancient human ships, sleek vessels that moved between stars using technology that still seemed advanced by current galactic standards. But more disturbing were the images of human exploration teams, creatures, that looked exactly like Park and Choi, walking calmly through environments that would kill most council species instantly. The situation was more serious than our initial report suggested, Park continued. Both sides in the conflict had developed weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems. They were using them regularly, destroying not just each other, but also any planets that might someday develop intelligent life. War Chief Grakthor interrupted with a growl that made several smaller species flinch. The historical records say your people ended the war by proving you could survive any weapon they used against you. You terrified entire civilizations into submission? Park nodded thoughtfully. That is one interpretation of events. However, our records show that we simply demonstrated the futility of using those weapons against anyone. Both sides were destroying everything they claimed to be fighting for. We showed them that there were better solutions to their problems. The display changed to show footage that no council member had ever seen. Humans walking through the aftermath of planetary bombardments, helping survivors, rebuilding damaged ecosystems, and establishing peaceful contact with shell-shocked military forces. They looked like rescue workers, not conquerors. Our exploration team specialized in what you might call crisis intervention, Dr. Choi explained. When civilizations reached the point where they might destroy themselves or others, we offered alternatives. Usually, this involved demonstrating that violence was not the most effective solution to their problems. Defense Minister Kethvar asked the question that everyone was thinking. Are you here because you have detected a new threat? Have you returned to intervene in another crisis? Park exchanged a look with Dr. Choi before answering. In a sense, yes. Our long-range monitoring systems detected concerning developments in this region. Species that should be cooperating were showing signs of increasing tension and competition. Trade disputes were escalating into military posturing. Several worlds were developing weapons that could destabilize entire star systems. He gestured to the council chamber around them. We came to evaluate the situation and offer assistance if needed. We were pleased to discover that you have already established an effective peacekeeping organization and maintained stability for thousands of years. The relief in the chamber was almost tangible. The Deathwalkers were not here to conquer or destroy. They were here to help maintain the peace they had established 50,000 years ago. But then Dr. Choi added something that sent chills through every representative present. However, our analysis suggests that the current system may not be adequate to handle emerging challenges. New technologies are being developed that could destabilize the entire galactic community. Some species are exploring research that could accidentally create existential threats to all intelligent life. She activated another display showing energy patterns and technological signatures that the Council's best scientists couldn't identify. These readings come from the outer rim systems. Someone is experimenting with forces that could unravel the basic structure of space-time. We believe intervention may be necessary to prevent an accidental apocalypse. Trade Coordinator Zilfara asked the practical question that was on everyone's mind. What kind of intervention are you proposing? Park smiled, and for the first time it looked genuinely warm instead of politely terrifying. We would like to offer our services as galactic peacekeepers and crisis responders. Humanity has considerable experience dealing with existential threats, technological disasters, and species that have developed dangerous capabilities beyond their wisdom to control them safely. The proposal was elegant and absolutely horrifying. The Deathwalkers wanted to become the galaxy's permanent protectors, using their legendary abilities to prevent civilizations from destroying themselves or others. They would be like cosmic firefighters appearing whenever someone was about to burn down the neighborhood. In exchange, Park continued. We ask only for friendship, fair trade relationships, and the occasional opportunity to learn about galactic culture. We find other species fascinating, and we would enjoy the chance to participate in the community we helped preserve. Chancellor Mordrix found his voice after a long moment of silence. What assurances can you give us that humanity will not abuse this position? You are asking us to trust you with the safety of the entire galaxy. Dr. Choi answered with the simple honesty that made humans so unsettling. You cannot trust us. Trust requires faith in someone else's good intentions, and good intentions can change. Instead, you can rely on us because our nature does not change. We survive by adapting to challenges and solving problems. A galaxy at war or in crisis would be a much less interesting place to live. She gestured to the displays showing human history. We spent millions of years learning to coexist with every predator and natural disaster on our homeworld. We developed our civilization by figuring out how to work with creatures and forces that wanted to kill us. Compared to that, managing galactic politics should be relatively simple. The vote was called that afternoon. It was unanimous, not because everyone trusted the humans, but because refusing the offer of protection from the Deathwalkers seemed like an excellent way to need protection from the Deathwalkers. Within a week, the first human crisis response teams were deployed to 3 separate systems, where local conflicts were threatening to escalate into larger wars. The reports that came back were surreal. Humans had ended a territorial dispute by volunteering to live in the contested zone that both sides claimed was too dangerous for habitation. They had prevented a trade war by offering to transport goods through a region of space that all other species considered absolutely impassable. In each case, the humans had solved the problem by being too difficult to kill or discourage. They went wherever others couldn't go, survived whatever others couldn't survive, and calmly negotiated solutions while standing in places that should have been uninhabitable. Dr. Veltar updated humanity's official classification from death, world species under observation, to galactic stabilization partners. In the margins of his report, he added a personal note that would become legendary throughout Council space. They call their world Earth, which in their language means dirt or soil. We call it what it truly is, the place where death itself learned to be kind. 6 months later, the galaxy was more peaceful than it had been in millennia. Not because anyone was afraid of human retaliation, but because the humans had made it clear that they genuinely wanted everyone to succeed and thrive. They were apex predators who had evolved beyond predation, cosmic survivors who used their abilities to help others survive as well. And in the deepest archives of Council space, new entries were added to the ancient warnings, not warnings about the Deathwalkers, but reminders of what happened when the galaxy's most dangerous species decided to be heroes instead of conquerors. The universe was a safer place because the creatures who could destroy it had chosen to protect it instead.